What if the most advanced air defense system in the Middle East couldn't stop a single missile? Not one, out of 13. What if the entire architecture of Iran's military deterrence, the radar networks, the interceptors, the command centers, the doctrine, everything it had built and tested and paid for with decades of investment, collapsed in under 5 minutes without a single Iranian soldier ever firing a shot that mattered? If that question makes you uncomfortable, it should, because what happened in the Gulf of Oman didn't just change a military balance. It answered something that governments from Moscow to Beijing to Brussels have been quietly asking for years, and the answer is not the one they were hoping for. Before we get into the details, if you find yourself unable to stop watching this, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Then share this with one person who thinks they already understand how modern warfare works, because after the next few minutes, they'll need to reconsider everything they thought they knew. Like, if this kind of deep analysis is what you're here for, let's go. It begins the way most consequential things in military history begin. Not with a declaration, not with a warning, with silence and mathematics. A San Antonio-class amphibious assault ship holds a specific position in the Gulf of Oman before sunrise. Not drifting, not patrolling in the conventional sense. Holding. The coordinates have been loaded into the ship's navigation computer with the kind of precision that doesn't happen by accident. Every number in that system is the result of weeks of planning, modeling, and wargaming conducted in climate-controlled rooms thousands of miles away by people who never once had to feel the heat rising off the Gulf water. On the flight deck, 4 HIMARS launcher pods sit secured to the deck. If you've never seen a HIMARS launcher up close, they don't look like weapons of mass consequence. They look like oversized metal boxes mounted on military trucks. Utilitarian, almost industrial. But what sits inside those pods is something that rewrites the rules of what naval power projection actually means in the 21st century. The time is 5:23 in the morning local time. The Iranian coast is visible on radar but dark to the human eye. 400 kilometers inland, deep inside the Islamic Republic, a military complex sits in the calm before the dawn prayer. A mechanized brigade is asleep in its barracks. Men who have spent the past month conducting missile and drone operations against Gulf shipping with what felt like geographic immunity. Iran's interior is deep, 400 kilometers of mountains, desert, and radar. Coverage between the coast and any threat the Americans could plausibly deliver. Or so they believed. That belief was the first thing that would die this morning. The first pod fires. And if you understand what happens in the next 40 seconds, you understand exactly why Iran's military leadership went pale when they received the damage report. A solid rocket booster ignites inside the launch cell. The noise is significant. The heat bloom is enormous, visible to every infrared sensor within range the instant it fires. And here is the first thing that seems counterintuitive. The Americans are not hiding this launch. They know Iran will see it the moment it happens. Speed of light. No one has an advantage in detection when everyone sees it at exactly the same instant. 2 seconds later, a second pod fires, then a third, then a fourth. 13 missiles total over a 40-second window, staggered deliberately, each launch timed to the fraction of a second. The reason for that staggering is everything. That is the entire tactical architecture of what is happening right now. And to understand it, you need to understand something about air defense mathematics that most people never think about. When a defender faces a single incoming missile, they have one opportunity to fail. One missile, one engagement window, one chance. If their system works, the threat dies. If it doesn't, one missile gets through. That is a manageable equation. Air defense systems worldwide are built around that model. Detect, track, engage, kill. Repeat as needed. But what happens when 13 missiles arrive in the same 10-second window? Not sequentially, one at a time, spaced out so the defender can methodically address each threat. All of them simultaneously in 10 seconds. The defender doesn't get 13 chances to fail. The defender gets one. And in that one chance, the fire control computer has to make impossible decisions about which targets to prioritize while the remaining warheads continue their descent completely uncontested. The math doesn't work. It was never designed to work. That is the point. This is what military planners call time on target. And it is not a new concept. Artillery crews have understood it for decades. What is new is the delivery system that makes it possible from a ship in open water against targets 400 kilometers inland. That delivery system is called the PrSM, Precision Strike Missile. The PrSM is the newest ballistic weapon in the American inventory. It replaced an older system that had reached the end of its tactical relevance, and it arrived with 2 significant upgrades that changed the strategic calculus completely. First, range. The PrSM reaches over 310 kilometers. That number is not impressive in isolation until you map it against the geography of the region. 310 kilometers is not a coastal strike. It is not a beach raid or a port attack. It is the ability to reach deep into the interior of a country from a ship that is itself beyond the visible horizon. Second, magazine depth. Each HIMARS pod carries 2 PrSM missiles, where the previous system carried only 1. The Americans doubled the number of shots per launcher, with no increase in the physical footprint of the equipment. Double the rounds, same truck, same pod, same ship. But the real revolution in the PrSM is not the range, and it is not the magazine, it is the flight profile. Your basic ballistic missile follows a predictable arc, up and over. Physics gives the defender a solvable problem. Once the missile clears its boost phase and the trajectory is established, any competent fire control computer can project where that warhead is going to land. The geometry is fixed, the solution is calculable. You aim where the missile is going to be, not where it is. That is how intercepts work. The PrSM does not fly that arc. The PrSM flies what engineers call a quasi-ballistic profile. It actively manages its energy throughout the entire flight. The ascent is lower than a textbook ballistic arc. The descent is not a passive fall. The missile is steering on the way down. Small control fins make corrections throughout the descent phase, shifting the impact point and defeating any intercept solution the defender has calculated. Think about that for a moment. A defender aiming at a falling object has to project where that object will be at the moment of intercept. If the object moves, the projection is wrong. If the projection is wrong, the interceptor misses. The PrSM moves, constantly, all the way down. You're not catching a stone someone dropped from a height. You're catching a stone that is actively arguing with you about where it intends to land, and now you have 13 of them, arriving in 10 seconds, each one steering. That is the problem Iran was handed at 5:23 in the morning. Now let's talk about what Iran actually had available to solve it. The first detection happens immediately. Iran's Zephyr over-the-horizon radar system catches the thermal bloom from the launch the instant the first booster fires. This is a radar that can theoretically see 3,000 kilometers by bouncing its signal off the ionosphere. Impressive on paper. But the ionosphere is not a fixed mirror. It shifts constantly with solar activity, atmospheric conditions, and time of day. The practical consequence is that Zephyr's range data carries an uncertainty of 20 to 40 kilometers. Its bearing data wanders by 1 to 2 degrees at maximum range, which at this distance translates into position errors of 50 kilometers or more. And it refreshes once every 30 to 60 seconds. In a conflict operating at the speed the Americans designed into this strike, a 30-second update rate is geological time. What Zephyr can deliver with confidence is a precise timestamp. The exact second the launches were detected, a time hack. That single piece of information goes up the chain immediately. It is the most useful thing this system can offer. Whether anyone downstream can use it in time is a question the radar operator cannot answer and is not his job to solve. 35 seconds into the strike, a second system activates, the Ghadir array, Iran's most capable long-range early warning radar. It can see 1,100 kilometers, covers the entire southern coastline, and unlike Zephyr, it builds real three-dimensional tracks. Altitude, bearing, range, all of it, updated in something close to real time. Ghadir is a genuinely impressive system. It would be enough in most scenarios to give Iran's air defense network the foundation it needs to respond. But here is the problem, and this problem is not technological, it is structural. A radar track is not a firing solution. A firing solution requires precision to the 10th of a degree in bearing, range accurate to within 100 meters. Updates every 1 to 2 seconds. Ghadir is an early warning system. It was built to detect and characterize threats arriving at strategic scale. It was not built to guide interceptors through their flight. Ghadir can tell you there is a ship in the darkness. Only the small fire control radar on the boat beside you can guide the shot that hits it. And that small fire control radar, the battery level system that can actually engage a target, has not received a usable firing solution yet, because the information pipeline between Ghadir and the battery is not automated. It requires human confirmation at multiple points along the chain. That chain is where Iran's response goes to die. Here's what the information has to do before a single Iranian interceptor can fire. It travels from the Ghadir array to National Air Defense Headquarters in Tehran. Confirmation is requested. Confirmation is given. The data moves to a regional sector command center. More confirmation. Authorization issued. The firing order moves from the sector command to the actual battery unit. The battery commander receives the order, verifies the track data, initializes his fire control systems, and prepares to engage. Every hop along that chain costs 30 seconds to a minute, and the total flight time of the incoming PrSM salvo is approximately 5 minutes. The mathematics are brutal. By the time an authorized firing order reaches a battery commander, 90 seconds of the 5-minute flight have already elapsed. Nearly a third of the entire engagement window is gone before a single Iranian interceptor has left its rail. The American network does not work this way. On the American side, the handoff from sensor to trigger is measured in seconds. The integrated network confirms automatically. The humans made their strategic decision weeks ago in Tampa, Florida, and that decision is simply executing itself. This morning, there are no permission gates, there's no confirmation chain. There's a firing solution, and there is a trigger, and the interval between them is negligible. That asymmetry, the gap between the speed of American automated decision-making and the speed of Iranian permissioned authorization, is not a technology gap. It is a doctrine gap. And doctrine gaps are harder to fix than hardware gaps. You can buy a new radar. You cannot restructure a culture of military authority in a single fiscal year. 90 seconds. Into the flight, something visually striking happens over the Gulf. The rocket boosters exhaust their fuel simultaneously, one after another, and 13 white contrail columns simply stop. The plumes end in midair. No fade, no diminishment. They snap off like lights switched off in sequence. The missiles are now coasting on momentum in total silence. 13 objects smaller than telephone poles. No infrared signature, no active radio emission, no visual return meaningful to the human eye from the ground. 50 kilometers above the surface, in airspace where the sky turns black even at noon, each missile tips its nose toward the Earth and begins the terminal phase of its flight. And somewhere below, one Iranian air defense battery finally has what it needs to act, the TOR-2B system, part of the third corded family of air defense equipment. These are not obsolete relics. These systems have tracked and engaged American surveillance drones throughout this period of conflict and scored real kills against real targets. The battery crew is trained, the equipment is maintained, the commander knows his job and executes it with professional discipline. But there is a ceiling. The TOR-2B's interceptors cannot climb above 25 to 30 kilometers altitude. The incoming PrSM salvo is currently crossing through 50 kilometers. For the next 2 minutes, the battery commander can do absolutely nothing except watch the altitude readouts on his display and wait. 2 minutes. In that 2 minutes, nothing his vehicles can do has any physical relevance to the problem. He runs the arithmetic that professional soldiers run when facing bad numbers. Launch second plus 300 seconds. Total flight time minus interceptor climb time minus network delay minus command authorization loss. The result is approximately 40 usable seconds of engagement opportunity against 13 maneuvering targets. For launcher rails, 40 seconds, 13 targets arriving simultaneously. Even in the theoretical best case where every interceptor reaches its target and every proximity fuse detonates at the correct moment, the math produces an outcome that 9 interceptors cannot change against 13 simultaneous arrivals. And intercepting a maneuvering quasi-ballistic warhead is not a theoretical best-case problem. The warhead is steering. The seeker has to project where the target will be at detonation. The target moves, the projection fails. The fuse detonates in the space where the missile was a fraction of a second ago, and the warhead continues its descent. The battery commander runs the engagement anyway, because that is what professional soldiers do with unfavorable mathematics. They execute anyway. 9 interceptors on the rails is better than 0. 4 rail launches, 2 sets of intercept attempts, proximity fuses detonating precisely where the targeting solution calculated, which is precisely where the targets had been before they maneuvered. Detonations bloom in the thin air above the battery compound. The smoke disperses. All 13 tracks continue their descent undisturbed. Now pay attention here, because what you are about to read separates this strike from every other precision weapons discussion you have seen. And this is the part that most analysts quietly skip over because it feels almost too clean to be real. The missiles have no seekers. There's no camera in the nose. No infrared seeker staring at the ground looking for heat signatures. No radar seeker pinging for returns. No electro-optical sensor comparing the view below to a stored image. Nothing that sees. The guidance section sits behind the warhead like a navigator flying entirely by instruments in complete cloud cover, without ever once looking out the window. A ring laser inertial measurement unit counts every movement the airframe makes across the entire flight. Drift accumulates. Over 5 minutes of flight, that drift reaches tens of meters. Once per second, a GPS receiver updates and wipes that drift back to 0, course corrected. Position reset. The cycle repeats 60 times across the descent. The aim points were surveyed by satellite to approximately 1 meter accuracy. The dormitory buildings at this compound run 30 to 50 meters across. The kill radius of the warhead is well within the footprint of the structure it is aimed at. A seeker, in this specific scenario, against fixed structures that do not move or hide or alter their thermal signature between mission planning and impact, would be dead weight. It would be ballast with electronics attached. What the fuse carries is a program delay. The exact duration of that delay is not published anywhere in any document. What it is waiting for becomes clear at 5:28 in the morning. The lead missile reaches the northern dormitory block of the 388th Mechanized Infantry Brigade. At Mach 3 in the lower atmosphere, the missile covers approximately 1,000 meters every second. Sound travels 330 meters per second at this elevation. The shockwave trails behind the airframe at a narrow angle. Sound arrives after the warhead does. The first thing the sentries on night duty hear is not a warning. It is the point defense autocannon inside the compound catching an automated radar alert and opening fire on a target it cannot reach in time. The missile penetrates the roof of the structure. The delay fuse was waiting for the impact signature. The main charge detonates inside the building, where all of its energy is contained within the structure. In the next 10 seconds, 12 more warheads arrive. Simultaneously, on a different vector, a second Sani. Antonio-class ship launches 6 additional missiles. Their target is not personnel, it is a rail junction. The single broad-gauge rail line feeding the province. A cratered switching yard requires weeks to months of reconstruction before it can handle military loads again. The road alternative is 500 kilometers of 2-lane mountain highway through terrain that is hostile to heavy transport in every season. This is not a raid. This is not a show of force. This is infrastructure denial. The Americans are not just destroying what Iran has built. They are ensuring Iran cannot move what it has left to where it needs it. By the time the damage assessment reaches Tehran, the ship that launched the first strike is already running hard south at full speed. Its wake a ruler straight line of foam that ends somewhere that is no longer relevant to anything Iran can target. And here is where the strategic picture becomes genuinely significant. For the month before this strike, every American precision action inside Iranian territory had targeted assets belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, a separate military organization with its own command structure, its own doctrine, its own political relationships. Striking IRGC assets carries a specific and understood political signal within Iran's internal power structure. The men at this compound were not IRGC. They were Artesh, regular conventional army, the professional military force of the Islamic Republic, separate from the Revolutionary Guard in organization, culture, and political significance. That distinction does not get lost on anyone inside the Iranian system. The target selection communicates something deliberate. The Americans are no longer restricting themselves to one category of Iranian military actor. The list has expanded. The interior is now accessible, and the methodology is repeatable. The fleet in the Gulf carries approximately 40 missiles per ship. Not a one-time demonstration, not a capability exhibition, a daily operational reality that can be sustained, rotated, and scaled. Every day the ships remain in the Gulf, the same mathematics applies, the same time-on-target doctrine is available. The same flight profiles are executable against any coordinate within 310 kilometers of open water. Iran's leadership now faces a strategic problem that has no clean solution. Denying American forces access to the Gulf would require a level of naval and air action that Iran's military is not currently capable of sustaining against American fleet defense. Building air defense systems capable of engaging targets at 50 kilometers altitude and providing the radar precision and network speed necessary to intercept quasi-ballistic maneuvering warheads in a 10-second arrival window represents years of development and tens of billions in investment Iran does not have liquid. The geographic assumption that depth equals safety is gone. The doctrinal assumption that permission-based command can keep pace with automated American network decision-making is gone. The technological assumption that existing interceptor ceilings are sufficient against the current American missile inventory is gone. What remains is a country that has spent decades building layered defenses against a threat that changed the geometry of the problem before the first interceptor ever left a rail. The Tor-2B battery commander filed his report while the last detonation smoke was still drifting across his position. 4 interceptors expended, 0 targets neutralized. Full salvo impact on target. Enemy ships have already departed the launch area. He ordered his vehicles to displace immediately, because doctrine says the Americans target batteries that fire, and he intends to be somewhere else before any follow-on strike arrives. He is a professional doing his job well within a system that was handed a problem the system was not designed to solve. That distinction matters. This is not a story about Iranian incompetence. The radar operators executed correctly. The early warning system performed as designed. The battery commander ran his engagement with discipline and tactical professionalism. The system failed not because the people inside it failed, but because the architecture of the system, the speed of permission, the ceiling of the interceptors, the sanctuary that exists between 30 and 50 kilometers altitude, was never built to handle what it was handed this morning. That is the harder lesson. You can retrain soldiers, you can replace commanders, you can rewrite tactical manuals, but you cannot fix a 25-kilometer ceiling by telling your crews to work harder. The ceiling is physics, and physics does not negotiate. Every government watching this from the outside is doing the same arithmetic this morning. Russia which designed the air defense doctrine Iran largely adapted. China, which is watching how American precision strike integrates across domains from ship to land target without a single manned aircraft entering contested airspace. European NATO members who have quietly updated their own threat assessments in the past hour. Every defense ministry on Earth is asking the same question. What would our numbers look like if we were the ones running that math? Not every answer is uncomfortable. Some countries with deeply integrated, automated, sensor-to-trigger networks built on continuous data sharing between platforms are looking at these results and drawing more confident conclusions about their own preparedness. Others are looking at the same results and quietly scheduling emergency acquisition reviews for the morning. The strategic message from this strike is not that the United States is invincible or that any military action is without cost or without risk. It is something more precise. It is that a specific combination of missile range, maneuvering terminal flight profile, time on target arrival compression, automated command networks, and systematic prior degradation of the defender's outer defense layers, when these elements combine correctly, produces outcomes that existing medium-range air defense architectures cannot address. That combination is not secret. It is not classified at the conceptual level. Every defense analyst in every capable country has the open source information necessary to understand what happened here. What they are sitting with now is the knowledge that understanding it intellectually and having a working answer to it operationally are two completely different things. Iran understood, intellectually, what American precision strike capabilities could do. Iran had watched the documentation, followed the contract announcements, monitored the test range data. None of that intellectual understanding produced a defensive solution that worked against 13 maneuvering warheads arriving in 10 seconds. There's a 400-kilometer gap between knowing something is possible and being able to stop it. The Gulf of Oman is quieter now than it was at 5:23 this morning. The ships are running south. The smoke has cleared over the compound. The battery commander's vehicles are already at their secondary position and going dark. And in Tehran, in a room where very serious people are having a conversation that will define the next chapter of this conflict, someone is explaining to very senior leadership that the interior of the country is no longer a sanctuary, that the ships were beyond the visual horizon before the first warning cleared, the second command hop, that the rail junction is going to take months to restore, that the Artesh, not just the Revolutionary Guard, took the hit this morning, that the mathematics of the next strike, if there is one, will be identical. Because the Americans did not exhaust a special capability. They demonstrated a daily operational reality. The question Iran's leadership is answering right now is not whether they can rebuild what was destroyed this morning. Barracks can be rebuilt. Rail junctions can be repaired. The question is whether they can rebuild this strategic assumption that their interior is unreachable. Because that assumption, once broken, does not get restored by construction work. It gets restored, if it gets restored at all, by building something that can actually stop what was fired this morning. And that project, if it begins today, does not produce results on any timeline that changes the situation this week or this month. The morning that the 308th woke up to, they woke up to a new architecture of risk, one where 400 kilometers inland is not deep enough, where speed of permission is not fast enough, where interceptor ceilings are not high enough, and where the number of incoming warheads in a 10-second window will always exceed the number of rails that any single battery can fill. That is not a temporary tactical disadvantage. That is a structural condition that will shape every operational decision Iran makes in the Gulf until something fundamental changes. And what would need to change to alter that condition is not a new missile or a new radar. It is a completely different approach to the speed, integration, and sealing of air defense, built from the ground up, funded at a scale Iran has not historically allocated to this problem, and tested against the specific flight profiles and arrival patterns that were demonstrated here this morning. The sun is fully up over the Gulf now. Merchant vessels are logging their position reports. News networks are running the phone footage from bridge wings. The contrails have dissipated. Everything that could be said mathematically has been said. The only question left is whether the lesson was heard.